Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for taking the time to come along and have a look at the key findings from our contact center best practice report. This is the second version of the report. I know that many of you received last year's version, and so I'm really excited for you to see today how much the report, I guess, has evolved. There was clearly a need for this report last year, and so in producing this year's report, we've put a lot more resources into it. One of the biggest differences you will notice with the report is that we've partnered with other industry experts. So today you're going to hear from 7 different speakers, and we've partnered with organisations who are experts in those areas of contact centre, I guess, expertise, and we've asked them to help us frame the questions for the report, and we've also asked them to help us summarise the results. And so they're going to present the results to you from their area as an expert in that particular field. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we get any further today. If I drop off as the host of the webinar, please be patient. I do a lot of webinar hosting. I've dropped off a few times before when I've had a power outage, but I'm all prepared for that. So just do be patient if anything occurs along those lines. I have muted everybody, but we would love for you to ask questions. And at the end of today, we will have an opportunity to answer any questions. There is a chat function. I'm just going to type hello in the chat function so that pops up there. So feel free to write any questions in. We might not be able to get to them on the run, but we will come back to them at the end of the session today. I guess just to start off with, to highlight some of the reasons around the report is, you know, as a contact center recruitment specialist, we're often seen as a little bit of an expert in the industry when it comes to market research and knowledge. So we wanted to put together a report because we are often asked questions that we are unable to answer. And we could not find that answer, so we thought, why not create the answers that people are looking for? And so that led to us creating the report last year and to a new version of it in 2020. So I'm just bringing up my screen here. For many of you, this might be the first time that you've used GoToMeeting. Hopefully you can see my screen now. You can navigate how things look on your end, but we'll be going through this document throughout a lot of the presentation. Just to kick off and I guess give some introduction to the report so you've got an idea on the scope of who's contributed. We've had close to 160, maybe close to 170 call centers that contributed their data. Most of them wanted to be anonymous, and that's completely fine. But on the screen now, you will see a little bit of a sample of who's contributed to the report, and that should help, I guess, to give you confidence that the data that you're looking at today and that we're going to talk to you about is a true sample size of the contact center industry. Many of the contact centers, as you'll see on the screen here, are based in cities around Australia, with 57% having a contact center in the heart of the city, just over a third having a suburban contact center, and 12 of them being outside of a city, and around 3/4 have an in-house contact center. In terms of who replied to the report, who provided their data, close to 1/4 of the responses there came from the banking and finance industry, 23% from that industry, followed by utilities, insurance, public service, and not-for-profit, making up the top 5 industries that the contact center respondents came from. So again, we feel this is a really good reflection. And when you're doing a study like this, there's kind of no rules, I guess, around what you need to do to, you know, say you've got quality data, but we feel we've got a really good snapshot, having 168 contact centers from around the industry. Now, the first pandemic response that we want to share with you is a really interesting one. It's around the work from home makeup of our workforces. And as we're all experiencing now, it's been a very different year. So the first question we asked contact centers was, before the pandemic, what percentage of your contact center was working from home on any given day? And it was 7%. And we asked post-pandemic, when pandemic has gone and we're back to normal, what do you think the work from home percentage will be? And we are still expecting it to be well over half. So this is an amazing finding, and this, as we all know, is really going to change the way we work. The flow-on effects from more than half of our workforces working from home in the future is going to really change the way a lot of us go about our working lives. As leaders and manager of contact centers, it's going to go about changing how we need to act and how we need to behave. Now, throughout the presentation today, you're going to see kind of two sets of data. The majority of the data for the best practice report we completed at the conclusion of March, just before the pandemic hit. But given the impact the pandemic's had, we went back to the market 10 weeks later, and we asked a series of questions about how the pandemic was impacting the performance of the contact center. So we'll be sharing with you two sets of data throughout today because the findings from both are still really, really relevant. For those who have just joined the call, thanks very much. Today's webinar is being recorded. My name's James. I'm a director at Smart Recruitment. I'm the coordinator and the producer of the report, and it's great to have you joining us today. So the first section that we're going to dive into is probably my favorite section. It's absenteeism and attrition. And when we walk through many contact centers throughout the year, lots of contact centers want to know what is good, what is bad, what is normal, what is best practice for absenteeism and attrition. Well, I'm here to share with you today that 10% is the average absenteeism for a contact center. When we lined up the responses of all the contact centers in the report, that was the average finding, that 10% of agents are sick or absent on any one day. 15% of contact centers though, 21% of contact centers, or 1 in 5, are really struggling though and are averaging 15% or above. However, 28% of contact centers have what we call best practice absenteeism, and that is their absenteeism is 6% or less. So you can compare your own data with what you're seeing on the screen here now, and that gives you a really good indication of your own benchmark compared to the rest of the industry. But regardless of what your average is during normal time, on the right-hand side here, all contact centers experience a peak in absenteeism at some point during the year. And what we found through our research is that peak is pretty much double the average absenteeism. So what normally leads to a peak in absenteeism though? Well, you know, it's not surprising that an increase in illness accounts for nearly half of the peaks in absenteeism. But we shouldn't just brush this question off, because what we can see here is that seasonal spikes in work and increases in the challenges of work significantly also increase to an increase in absenteeism throughout the year. So end of financial year, for example, if you're a financial services organization and your contact center has a really big spike of work, you might sometimes think, great, we got through it. But then you might experience, you know, post-seasonal spike peaks in absenteeism. It's really challenging as an industry for us to get this right. What's been fascinating though, as you can see on your screen now, is that absenteeism and attrition rates have completely flipped on their head during the pandemic. On the left here, you're looking at absenteeism, and on the right, you're looking at attrition. And what you will notice from the two longest bars on each of those graphs is that that is showing lower levels than normal. So 76% of contact centers have experienced low levels of absenteeism during the pandemic, and a similar number have experienced lower levels of staff turnover. Now, as a recruitment agency specializing in contact center recruitment, for 15 years, we've had agents who are very gun-ho and very confident to walk out of their contact center and go and find another job. But things have completely changed due to the pandemic. Job security has gone through the roof as the #1 criteria for a contact center agent. And therefore as well, absenteeism has dropped, and there's a lot of follow-up research to be done here. We know that agents are taking less days off, but is that necessarily a good thing? If a contact center agent is too sick to come into our physical office, do we actually want them still working from home? And that's some of the questions that some of our other presenters will touch on here today. In terms of overall attrition, on the left-hand side of your screen there, if you work down the column, what we've asked here is the retention of new agents. So when you start a group of new agents, how many are still there after 1, 2, 3, 6, and 12 months? So we start with 100%, and then that number trickles down. The dark green column is the recent results. The light green column is the year before. So what we found is a consistent improvement in the retention of new agents. So contact centers are doing better with their recruitment, their selection, their onboarding, and their training throughout the first 12 months. All of this data here was collected pre-COVID. So a 6% increase might not sound like a lot after the first year, but just think about the flow-on effects to the, I guess, relief of resources your contact center has when you are maintaining more staff. And then on the right-hand side, again, mirroring these stats, we've seen an increase in what we call best practice. So at all marks that we measure the data, we've seen an increase in contact centers retaining a very, very high level of their staff. So there's a huge amount of data here that we can talk through with you. When you get your report in the mail, your 100-page report, you've got 12 pages there dedicated to absenteeism and attrition. Go through that, have a look, and find where your contact center lies, and feel free to get in touch if you want more examples of contact centers who are doing it really, really well. We're now going to look at team leaders. So one of the feedbacks we got from our focus group of contact center managers was we want to know more about the role of the team leader. There's not a lot of information we can find to compare team leader roles. So I'm going to throw over now to Alex from COPC, which are one of Australia's leading training organisations, who's interpreted the results to the findings and is going to talk you through them today. I'd like to welcome Alex.
Thank you, James. I appreciate the opportunity to come here. So as James said, my focus in this report was all about team leaders. And that's important because I think team leaders are one of the most important roles to get right in operations. They touch all of your frontline staff, and their ability to care, to mentor, to train, to coach really underpins the success of your overall operation. One of the focus points in this research was the breakdown of team leader duties. What do they spend time on? What is considered important? And what duties do they lack the skills in? Where is there opportunity for them to develop? The first thing we'll focus on is where they're not spending sufficient time. And what was highlighted here is that they're not spending enough time on those core people duties, so coaching and development. However, when we also look at their weaknesses, coaching and development is also considered their greatest weakness. So perhaps there's a link here. Team leaders might be avoiding the activities that they're not very good at. We also looked at where time is being wasted. And in time being wasted, we see that more administration type tasks, so time spent in meetings, coordinating WFM and reporting, is where time is being spent but isn't delivering the amount of value that organizations really want. So there's lots of data here around duties. A second theme though, what we touched on was around KPIs, around how we hold people accountable. And there are many different KPIs, that's it there. There are many different KPIs that people have, but many of them are just different names, but the same intent. So rather than analyzing specific wording, we really looked at it by group. And the KPIs are organized by the most common to the least common. And the first thing I would note, actually on the left, is that almost 1 out of 5 team leaders don't have KPIs. That I think that just means straight away there's an opportunity there. If we don't have clear KPIs, we're not providing that direction and focus. But looking at the KPIs that people do have, I'm surprised that quality and coaching is actually higher than other KPIs around the voice of the customer, like Net Promoter Score, customer satisfaction, and customer effort score. And that's my surprise is really because those measurements are the external measurements of success, whereas quality is more of an internal measurement of success. It's also interesting that resolution, our ability to actually help customers and answer their questions, is 8th out of 10, when I would argue it's significantly more important not just to your operations, but to your customers than other metrics like adherence or service level. So a lot of data around KPIs. From a team leader development point of view, 3 in 5 team leaders don't have a structured development program. So they might have some level of development, but not a plan, not a structured approach. And again, I see this as an opportunity across the industry. I think team leaders are one of the most important roles to get right, and we need to support them in this. If we think that coaching and development is a big focus, but they're very weak in it, perhaps they are weak in it because we're not very diligent or structured or strategic in how we develop those skills. Another point to touch on to kind of wrap up my final points from the TL was around the COVID perspective. We really wanted to understand the impact that this has had on team leaders. There were many things highlighted, but at a high level, essentially everyone says COVID's had an impact on us. 93% says it's had a real impact on our business. From a team leader perspective, the three biggest changes that COVID has had account for more than 50% of the feedback given. So they were quite significant, and they are new ways of communication, technology challenges, and learning to coach and lead remotely. And I think this is linked to the first theme of coaching and development. So if prior to COVID, when we first got that data, it was considered the most important skill, but one that we lack the ability to execute on well, then of course, when we move to the new normal of remote management, that will be a more significant challenge for operations. So lots of different insights in this section. I encourage you to read through it once James distributes the report. But to bring a couple of those thoughts together, I think team leaders, again, are one of the most important roles to support your operations, but the data here says that many of the team leaders themselves are not being supported. They don't necessarily have a structured development plan. A chunk of them don't have clear KPIs. And the COVID remote workspace has just taken this to a new level. So I'd recommend really three things if you're trying to do a quick self-assessment is consider how well you are investing in your team leaders to help them be effective leaders in a remote environment. Secondly, consider the KPIs. Not just do your team leaders have KPIs, but do they make sense for your business? Are they driving the right outcomes? And then thirdly, we really need to optimize operations. We need to remove the hygiene tasks of operations so that your team leaders can focus on what really matters for your business. But lots of data in here. Strongly encourage you to read through it. Thank you, James.
Thanks very much, Alex, and thank you to COPC for their support in the coordination of the report this year. But the role of the team leader is fascinating, and we will touch on it several times today. And as this report shows, there is such huge differences across the industry in the expectations and the prioritization of the work of a team leader. Modern ways of working, agile contact centers. It's something that we are asked about all the time. For contact centers that are old school and are not agile, it is fascinating for them to hear that there are different ways of working. So in this report, we wanted to take a look at how contact centers are working, and we've partnered with Sean and his team from the Agile Contact Center, who have been able to provide us with a great analysis of the results of this section. So I'd like to introduce Sean.
Thank you, James, and welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for those that contributed. If there's anyone here who has, it's certainly made for a really, really awesome report this year round, and the first time we've contributed. So yeah, awesome to be a part of it. Look, I'm going to start by stating the obvious, which you would all know, is that contact centers are never going to be the same again. And so now is the ideal time, I think, to take a look at how you approach every part of your contact center operation, particularly how you lead it. And so hopefully what I can show you today is a bit of a deep dive on these findings, but also some of the opportunities that might exist for you, whether you see yourself as more of a traditional contact center or a traditional leader, or whether you kind of see yourself more at, you know, that leading edge. Hopefully you can take away a couple of ideas around best practice. And that's why I'm really excited to talk to you guys through this, because I think, you know, this view of contact centers and the contact center world is, you know, it's never been more important than it is now, particularly in how they drive customer experience. But let's dive in. So first thing is around purpose and priorities. And the good news is that 75% of contact centers are really clear on how their roles align to the organization's purpose, with 1 in 4 seeing an opportunity to be better aligned. And there are a couple of reasons why purpose is so important. And the first one is the makeup of the workforce, being millennials. They're the most purpose-driven generation we have seen yet. And with 50% of the workforce being made up of them, and probably a much higher percentage in a lot of contact centers, they're having a big influence over the way that we lead teams. And our research says that when they're connected to the purpose, they are 225% more productive, which is just a staggering number. And it's also great for attracting talent as well. 2/3 of millennials look for employers where they can make a difference. And once they're with your organization, they're 5 times more likely to stay. So just by having purpose, making it clear and connecting people to it, you get some awesome bottom line benefits out of doing that. As far as prioritization is concerned, contact centers are busier than ever. And with change, busier than ever with change, and getting teams aligned around the priorities presents a huge opportunity, with 85% of leaders saying that this could be done better. And there's always more work to do than there is time to do it. That's a perennial problem for all contact centers. So prioritization is of paramount importance. And what you decide not to do is just as important as what you decide you will do. And having a way to prioritize and deliver that work is the first step. And we've seen teams use visualization as a really effective tool to do this. So, you know, things like Teams and Trello, really simple tools to be able to do that. On to change and COVID. So the industry, in my view, had a phenomenal response to COVID, with getting the technology ready to support service delivery in a matter of weeks. And that happened almost on a global scale, which is phenomenal. But interestingly, that disruptive external shock that forced the change was considered to be more effectively handled than the normal changes that occur within an organization, which is just a fascinating insight. And if I go back to my previous point on prioritization, there may be an opportunity for all leaders to reconsider the work that is truly aligned to your strategic priorities, and think about how much change your organization is trying to do to your contact center at any time. Now, this could be your opportunity to start driving a different conversation around the volume of change occurring and how to get it done most effectively. And again, visualization is a really powerful way to do that, to highlight things like your capacity constraints around the sheer volume of change happening. Onto collaboration and change effectiveness. So the next insight around collaboration and change effectiveness tells us that 82% of leaders say collaboration could be better when delivering change. A huge, huge number. Most of the change that happens in a contact center comes from outside the team. So your project teams, your program of work space. And it's critical that leaders have the time to spend with their peers and stakeholders to plan the most effective way to deliver that change and the strategy, so it works for their teams. But unfortunately, 62% of leaders are saying that they don't have enough time to do that strategic work because they're focused on putting out fires and stuck in the day-to-day, which presents a real problem with teams being able to stay focused and working on the right stuff. On to continuous improvement. James spoke earlier about spikes in demand and surges in demand that happens in contact center. You know, things blow up from time to times. But, you know, with the work that we do with teams, we believe that, you know, not all, but a lot of that can be proactively managed by focusing on reducing unnecessary interactions from occurring in the first place. Something we call failure demand. So broken processes, systems that don't work the way they should, or even human error. That means your customers need to contact you unnecessarily. So a focus on continually improving your processes and systems is a really effective way of reducing that demand coming in. And while most contact centers have a continuous improvement program in place, 37% do not, which means they have no way to address that impact on their teams. And interestingly, the data shows that 33% of absenteeism is actually caused by high volumes of work or the more challenging nature of work, as James talked about earlier, associated with those spikes. So, you know, it's a huge opportunity. And there's a huge incentive to address those sources of failure demand, not just to create more capacity for your teams, but help them be more productive and also reduce your operating costs. On to value. So the question of how well the organisation understands the value of your contact centre, this paints a really clear picture that there's a lot of work to do, with half of the respondents giving a less than favourable response on this one. But this isn't a new problem. You know, many organisations see the contact centre purely as a cost centre, but it is one that can be addressed. The first thing to do is change that perception, and the ways that you can do that really effectively to get your team a seat at the table, so that you can design or be involved in the design of new projects, and help you have a say on how these initiatives are delivered, is really to start to highlight those pain points, as I spoke about earlier, those sources of failure demand. So finally, in summary, just to round things out, by far and away the biggest challenge we see is leadership, and that was highlighted earlier as well, particularly at that team leader level. And we believe a new breed of leadership is what is required. Leaders that can build connected, engaged, and productive teams remotely. You know, leading with trust and purpose will be the hallmarks of these new leaders. Empowering the people that do the work to own the work, and work relentlessly to remove the barriers that prevent your teams from delivering, you know, those amazing experiences that they want to deliver. And the role of team leaders in the modern contact center is under pressure, clearly. Most team leaders have been on the phones. So when push comes to shove, they're called on to play a customer service role during those demand spikes. And in fact, the report says that 1 in 2 team leaders is asked to do this. And they spend up to 25% of their day responding to customer inquiries. So you do the sums on that really quickly, and that's a huge amount of time. So we recommend a couple of things to be able to address this and build a value center, not a cost center. So leading with purpose and trust. Set high standards based on trust, and have values-based conversations with your people rather than purely just monitoring them on numbers. Align your teams around purpose. If you haven't got a purpose, now's the time to get one, and get really good at telling stories about where you see your purpose come to life. And, you know, I'll just remind you of those stats earlier on around the attrition, around absenteeism, around, you know, retaining your people and productivity. You know, huge bottom line benefits. It's not just fluffy stories about purpose. Second, rally your teams around the work. Teams that are connected to the work have more accountability for the work. And do that through visualizing your key customer experience metrics. Give your teams the opportunity to have daily stand-ups or even weekly stand-ups if you can, so that they can get involved in looking at those metrics and deciding on ways that they can improve them and how they can plan the day. That then frees leaders up to be able to work on the strategic priorities like change and projects, rather than being bedded down in the day-to-day running of the teams. And then finally, elevate the voice of the contact center. So visualize your top 3 to 5 customer pain points, quantify the impact that is having on your ability to service customers, and then you've got a powerful message that you can share with the rest of the organization. You know, things like CSAT and effort are really great metrics to pick. That then helps you build business cases to remove the waste, to improve the customer experience, and again, frees team leaders up from having to make calls when you've got those big demand spikes because you've reduced your call volumes or your email or chat volumes coming in. And that then starts to educate the whole business, the whole organization, on the role of the contact center from being more than just a cost center. So that's pretty much me. But to finish up, you know, the next year is going to be critical for contact centers as you go from being in this disrupted world to starting to think about how you optimize this new normal. We really encourage leaders to take the time to take a different approach on how they do it. And the case study that OUA have given us for the report is such a powerful one, a really great journey. And you know, there's some really hard numbers around the benefits they've seen around things like attrition and productivity as well. So have a read of that and let us know if you've got any questions.
Thanks very much, Sean. And as Sean mentioned there, we've got 4 or 5 case studies scattered throughout the best practice report. This one in particular here is absolutely fascinating. The journey that Open Universities Australia Contact Centre went on. It includes there before, and it also shows what the results look like from moving to becoming an agile contact centre. Thanks very much again, Sean. Well, last year at Smart Recruitment, we felt that there was a real growing issue with mental health in contact centres, and I'm sure many of you are the same. So We partnered with AP Psychology, and we put on a breakfast in Melbourne, and that breakfast of 100 to 120 people sold out within 24 hours. We put on a second breakfast, and that also sold out within a day or two. So we were very clearly told that, you know, mental health in contact centres is a huge issue at the moment, and is becoming more prevalent in broader society. So we couldn't do an industry-wide research project without looking deeply into the role of mental health and asking contact centres how they're going about addressing it at the moment. So I'd like to introduce Tom from AP Psychology, who's going to take us through the mental health section of the report. Over to you, Tom.
Thank you, James. Good morning, everybody. Indeed, very exciting to be here and very exciting to see mental health as part of a best practice report here in the contact center industry. I think indeed, as you already alluded to, James, it is something that is very prevalent at the moment, and we know pre-COVID, we knew that 1 in 5 Australians at any given time will be struggling with a mental health condition. And it's probably safe to say that throughout the last six to 9 months, that number has probably gone up. And the silver lining around that, I guess, as well, just to start with that as well, I think is that we can all relate a bit more to what it might be like to struggle with levels of stress and anxiety or feelings of depression a bit more. So, and I guess that also came out through the stats that we saw from the reporting, where we indeed saw that over 74% of the contact centers actually rate mental health as being very, very important to look at, which is very much in line with the fact that 9 in 10 Australians at the moment indicate that mental health in the workplace is an important issue. Equally interesting is that when we looked at the levels of confidence around mental health in the workplace, it was roughly half of the contact centers that felt comfortable or confident that they were able to address mental health appropriately. And that is in line with, at the moment, the broader Australia as well, where only 1 in 2 people actually feel that they're working at a mentally healthy workplace. So that goes to show that our levels of awareness around mental health are definitely there on the increase, and the majority of us agree that it's important. But pretty much half of us don't really feel confident that we can do something effectively about it. So I think some of the other stats that come throughout the research are very interesting to have a look at, and I won't go through all of them, and I'll leave that to all of you to have a good look at. It's good to see though that the majority of you as well has actually put extra measures in place during COVID-19. I think it's 79% of the top of my head had said that they put some extra measures in place to address mental health during this pandemic. And I think what's really interesting there as well is, and Sean alluded to that as well, that the world we live in and the world we work in has changed, where initially we might have been holding our breaths going like, okay, we'll just, for 2-3 months, we'll get through this and then we'll go back to normal. Reality is that's not going to happen, and highlighted as well by the fact that 58% of contact centers expect, or 58% of the workforce is expected to be working from home moving forward. And that becomes a really interesting part when we get to mental health as well, particularly also in light to, James, what you already mentioned around the numbers about absenteeism and attrition, because what I would like to throw in the mix there as well is the concept actually of presenteeism. Now that is slightly less tangible and slightly harder to measure, but the reality is that when it comes to mental health, the biggest cost associated to mental health in the workplace is presenteeism. So that's that concept of people being physically present at work, but they're not quite there because I've got other things going on in my head. And it's interesting, therefore, as well to see that absenteeism dropping and attrition dropping, but that might actually indicate that under the service, presenteeism is significantly increasing. So that's something to be really mindful of, and will be a real challenge moving forward if we have more than half of our workforce working from home. And I think that's where the second part comes in there as to where to from here in that new normal. And Alex touched on something as well that is really important there, where for leaders, just again, I'm going to echo what Sean and Alex have said around the importance of team leaders and leadership in general around this. Is typically we tend to avoid activities that we're not good at, I think is how Alex positioned it. And this is very similar with mental health, where we know it's important, but our levels of confidence about how we address it and how we go about it are not that great. And therefore, that's going to be the real challenge with people working from home. How do we still meaningful connect with them and support them and touch base and see how people are traveling. How do we develop that skill set? How do we make that part of our normal ways of working? And indeed, we're going to a modern way of working, and a lot of it is going to be virtual and other systems that we need to have in place around that. But I would almost say, how can we still bring back in the old school connectivity in that? So how do we train our leaders in our organization to really have meaningful connections with people, to be able to touch in, to have those conversations, and checking in with people, so we can actually stay across that, and pick up on signs and symptoms early. That's the biggest part around mental health that we as workplaces can do, is pick up early. Somebody might be struggling, because then we can intervene. Now, I guess the positive in all of this is that indeed it looks like, based on the data, that we all see it's important. We've all got some things already in place, so we're primed to start taking action. But it's really about, if we think about changing behavior as well, there's two really key parts that play into that. One is indeed importance, and the other one is confidence, though. And as long as confidence is not up there, it's going to be really hard to drive any behavior, because indeed, to Alex's point, we might just go like, well, I'll put that in a too high basket for now, and I've got other things to do. And the problem there is that mental health concerns exacerbate and get worse, and then we've got far bigger problems of people going off work or putting in claims, etc. So it's about, how do we build those levels of confidence in our leaders as well as in our frontline staff, about the awareness of them and where they can go for support, how they can have conversations around this, so we can take that proactive approach towards mental health, apply early intervention strategies, and keep our workforce safe and healthy, both physically and mentally, whether they're working from home or in the contact center. So I guess as a final thought, I would suggest for everybody to reflect on how can we build the levels of confidence and ability of our leaders and our organization to have conversations about mental health, to reduce that stigma, to incorporate a well-being check-in as part of the norm in my individual check-in, in my team well meetings, and have those conversations, so we can start working towards a culture that is open and honest about mental health and supporting our people to be their best selves.
Thanks very much, Tom. It's going to be fascinating, I think, as we come out of this pandemic, particularly in Melbourne, as there's a bit of light at the end of the tunnel, how contact centres, not necessarily enact, but how do they enable mental health services, in a remote workforce largely as well. So there's so much work to be done on this area, but the leading contact centres that invest the time and the resources and the money into it, we're hearing are certainly getting the results. So if you're a contact centre and you feel that your organisation is not taking mental health seriously enough, get a copy of the report. It's a benchmarking study. You can use that to really promote the importance of mental health in your contact centre. All right, so a change of tack now. We're going to look at employee engagement, and this is something every contact centre wants to know. How can we better engage our employees? I'd love to introduce my colleague from Adelaide, Matthew Dew, who is going to take us through the key findings from this section of the report.
Thanks very much, James. Great to be here. Welcome, everybody. Yeah, really excited, obviously, to be given the opportunity to analyse and comment on the topic of employee engagement. I think as recruiters, we certainly understand the importance of recruiting the right talent into your businesses and our own. But what's equally important and becoming more and more important, I think, is how we engage and retain that talent that we do have. Because there is a war on talent. It's only getting more and more fierce, particularly as James was speaking about with retention being higher, it's harder to find experience. So if you've got experienced leaders and frontline staff, particularly in sales and service in contact centres, you want to be hanging on to them, because people are throwing more money to try and lure people across. And so engagement is really, really important, because it's not all about money. If we look at page 55 of the report, we can see right off the bat, so the average engagement score across all contact centres surveyed was 72%. There was 167 leaders that contributed to this report, and 87% of those people said that the results were about what they expected or even higher. So that's a really good result. Like, that should be applauded, I suppose. But what I wanted to talk about was the other 28%, that area of opportunity. Now, I know a lot of centre leaders, and I've got some clients sitting here on this call that are probably thinking, I'd be pretty happy with 72%. But 28% of your teams are either disengaged or experiencing that presenteeism issue that Tom was speaking about. So if we break that down a bit further, that means that out of a team of 10, 3 of your agents are either completely disengaged or there but not really there. Now imagine your favourite sporting team go out to play a grand final or play on the weekend. How happy would you be as a supporter knowing that 28% of that team didn't care if they won or not? I'm an Adelaide Crows supporter, so the entire 2020 seasons felt a little bit like that for me. But what we do know, and we found in the first version of the report, was that engagement is more than just ping pong tables. It's much deeper than that. And we started to dive into that. This year, we've gone deeper again. So if we remember, James talked about absenteeism and attrition right at the start of today's session. And we learned that 53% of respondents said that there was no plan to reduce attrition, or 33% said absenteeism is a real challenge or even out of control. 33% of respondents said that it was potentially out of control. The key to reducing these numbers and gaining control, and Sean spoke about it as well, is the team leaders. Now, there's no silver bullet, but they are a huge piece of this puzzle. On page 44 of the report, we can see that the top initiatives that were introduced were reward and recognition and fun. But if we look at the next 3, it's staff development, communication, and leadership. Now, we remember when Alex from COPC spoke in the team leader section, he talked about the main areas of opportunity for our team leaders were coaching and development, personnel issues, and leadership. Investing on coaching and leadership skills for our team leaders and giving them the skills and performance frameworks to be able to coach against poor performance and engage high performing and motivated staff is critical to engagement. It's not just the engagement of your staff, it's actually really critical to the engagement of your team leaders, giving them the time and space and opportunity to develop themselves and keep them engaged. So I suppose in summing up, I don't want to overcook that because I think that's a really, really important message. Your team leaders are a huge key to engagement across your centres. You know, employee engagement is a real challenge for all businesses, not just contact centres. And the results speak for themselves. You know, it's no secret. Happy and motivated staff equals a high quality of work and a high quality of customer service. Or sales, if you're in a sales environment. Low engagement is high absenteeism, high turnover, which is a poor quality of work, and it impacts what our customers are receiving. Remember, if your staff don't love your business or brand, how can your customers? Because it's your staff that deliver that product or service. And the way that we can do this is to nurture and develop our high performance, communicate with our staff, and foster an environment of trust that provides a psychological safety, and manage poor performance, which will promote high performance. Fruit bowls, movie tickets, ping pong tables, we've seen it all before. They work, but it's short term. It's all hygiene stuff. It's nice to go to work and be able to play ping pong, or we've got a ping pong table in our office in the Melbourne CBD, although I think the guys from Melbourne might need to blow the dust off of it when they get back there. But yeah, it's good fun, but no one comes and works for Smart because we've got a ping pong table. You can buy them from Kmart for $200 and stick one in your backyard. People come and work for Smart because of our culture and because we develop our people. So investing into the leadership and the coaching and the development of your staff will keep your staff and leaders engaged, will increase their performance and their capacity, and ultimately retain them in your business. And I talked before about the battle versus the war. The fruit bowls and the movie tickets, yeah, that's winning the battle, but getting overall engagement across your teams, that's winning the war. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much for your time. If anybody would like to reach out and discuss anything further, we'd love to hear from you. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Maddie. Just in summary, I want to highlight as well, we've got 2 case studies in the report around employee engagement. We hear from Domain Group and we highlight their Career Day program that they have, which has had a really big impact. And we've also got a case study from ANZ, which earlier this year won Best Contact Centre Culture at Customer Contact Week on the Gold Coast, which I know a lot of you have been to. This is a good story around the transformational journey of taking, I guess, a less than desirable culture to an award-winning culture. The next section we're going to have a look at is customer experience, and this is a new category for the report this year. I'd like to introduce Justin Tippett from CX Central, who's going to take us through these key findings.
Thank you, James. Good morning, everyone. Great to see some familiar faces and clients on the call. It's a fantastic initiative by Smart, so congratulations, James, just publicly on putting this together, because as an industry, you know, we love lots of data, and there has been a bit of a gap, so it's fantastic to get some actual real stuff behind us and look at it. As James alluded to, this is the first time we've included CX, and I guess there's a real reason for that, because as an industry, we've always thought that we're really important, and why doesn't the rest of the company give us more money to invest in the contact center, right? But we're just part of this big picture, and so when we talk about CX, it's typically about everything that's involved in the customer experience. So if you think of an online store as an example, from going to the website to how easy it was to place my order, was the payment easy, and then it goes right through to delivery. How long did it take the goods to arrive? When the goods arrived, were they in fantastic conditioning? What was the packaging like? What were the instructions like? Did the product work as described? All those sorts of things are CX. And the space that we typically play in is really around that customer service space. It's really just when something goes wrong or people want more information. And so the reason we sort of wanted to have a look at this is going to CX and say, hey, what's happening in the broader context, and how do contact centers fit into that now? Because we see that we are starting to play more and more of a bigger role in CX as opposed to just customer service. So what did we actually find in this report? One of the first things we wanted to start off was just around whether companies have a customer service vision. And I think it's not unusual that most organizations will have a vision for their company, but a customer service vision is something a little bit different. It's really just something, a statement, if you like, that defines the type of customer service that the employees are expected to provide. So an example might be, to support our customers and each other in a manner that's effortless, accurate, and friendly. And as it was sort of alluded to a bit earlier with Sean, we know that millennials in particular are so much more engaged if you give them a purpose. And having that customer service vision certainly helps in your contact center. And when we asked the question, as you can see there in the results, 61% of contact centers don't have a customer service vision. So there's a great opportunity for you if you don't already have one. It's something that you really should look at, and you'll definitely get some benefits out of it. On the other page, we also wanted to look at how companies are actually measuring the customer experience. And I think what you will find is Net Promoter Score is still a very popular. It's on the other page, James, same one that we started with. But Net Promoter Score and CSAT are the most common. So Net Promoter Score is, how likely are you to recommend, this product or service to your family and friends. And so that's certainly the most popular. But we are also seeing that Net Promoter Score is used a lot in transactions at the end of every call. How did you rate the agent? And that's not really what an NPS was designed for. And so I think that's going to evolve over time. And the other one that was quite low was the customer effort score. We know there's a fantastic correlation for how easy you make it for customers to do business with you, to high satisfaction levels, high loyalty, etc. So I think what we will see again is a bit of a rise in that customer effort score. On to the next slide for us, James, thank you. One of the things we looked at was, how to, what are companies, actually slip straight forward, go to 64, sorry mate, there we go. What we wanted to look at was KPIs. And we've always thought, why aren't we more important? Why don't more people care about the contact center? And a lot of that was around the KPIs and how many get reported up the line. So we sort of wanted to ask the question. And what that really told us now is that 34% of the respondents in the survey report on more than 5 KPIs up to senior levels in the business. So the businesses are taking a very active interest in the results of the contact center. And when we look at the KPIs, when we dug a little bit deeper, they're very much the quantitative based metrics. So we're still looking at things like grade of service, abandoned calls, ASA, etc. And I think the quality side of it, there's still some room for opportunities in there. We also asked who's responsible for measuring the customer experience. And interestingly enough, you can see that as in terms of having a senior role now, it's nearly half and half of companies actually have a dedicated senior person responsible for that entire customer experience. Sometimes the contact center falls into their remit, and sometimes it's still in a separate part of the business. On to the next page for us, please, James. The other thing we wanted to look at was just how many calls are being assessed for quality. Most call centers these days are recording calls, and we wanted to know, well, when you're recording those calls and using them to assess the quality of an agent, how many calls are you actually assessing a month? And what you can see there is that the bulk there of 37% of call centers take 3 to 4 calls per agent per month to assess their entire quality score. And to put that into context, if an agent does about 60 calls a day, we're essentially basing their whole month's performance on 0.3% of their calls. So there is certainly a very, very low basis there that we're using to assess them. And I think what we'll find, and perhaps the variant will cover that off shortly, is we're seeing things like speech analytics now are really starting to help with measuring quality as well as just listening to the actual calls themselves. We also know that often the team leader is the one who gets stuck with measuring the calls, and as COPC presented a bit earlier, we know that team leaders are always pushed for a bit of time. So there's always this real struggle, and we know quality is important, but it doesn't seem like we're paying as much attention to it as we probably need to in the contact center. The other thing I will say on quality is a lot of the standards that we look at tend to be very compliance-based standards. And that is, did they say the customer's name, or did they ask to put the customer on hold, etc., as opposed to more of the subjective measures like, did they display empathy, were they professional, were they courteous, etc. So that's certainly another room for improvement. And we did notice that 7% of call centers are actually measuring more than 20 calls per month for quality. So well done. That's a huge investment to try and focus that much. So hopefully that'll improve over time as well. On to the next slide there. One of the other things we wanted to touch on was just around knowledge management tools. And what is a knowledge management tool? Because I think there's still a bit of confusion out there in the industry. It's not Word, it's not Microsoft Word, it's not Microsoft Excel, it's not an A4 book on your desk, it's not some sticky notes stuck all over your screen, and it's not even SharePoint. Knowledge management is specifically built software that helps your agents find the right answer at the right time. So instead of sort of getting a whole page of text presented on the screen, it'll just highlight the exact part that they need in response to the query that they've typed in. There's a huge benefit in putting one in your contact center, and the stats have shown us there that literally it's split. Half the centers surveyed have a knowledge management tool and half don't. So if it's something that you haven't looked at already, the return on investment is very, very positive, and we can certainly give you a hand if you need to work out which ones are the best ones to look at. As we've done with this report, and as James alluded to earlier, we wanted to look at what has happened during COVID. There's no doubt it's had a huge impact on customers, but also employees. And one of the things we noticed around CX was nothing much has changed. So about 80% of businesses said nothing really changed in their focus on customer experience during COVID. And that's probably right. If you're going to focus on your customers, you're going to focus on them regardless of what's happening. But what we did see was a bit of a softening around a couple of things, and some of those are around metrics, around average handle time. We know customers just a little bit more anxious, or they've got more to vent, and we want to talk about COVID and restrictions and all these sorts of things, and they're blowing out AHT times. And we also know for our agents, they've had to undergo a huge shift. Majority of staff, rather than working in an office and having a team and team leaders around them, have had to move to a home environment. So we've certainly seen the centres sort of relax some of those metrics, which is great. In terms of CX, what does best practice look like in terms of wrapping up? One, I would definitely say make sure you have a customer service vision. Without a compass, it's really easy to get lost. So give you guys a bit of a sense of direction on the type of service that you want to provide, for your customers. When you're talking about your contact center, make sure you use numbers, return on investment, and defined outcomes if you're doing business cases. We've got so much data in the call center, so it's a real advantage to us. And it's just about talking the business languages, because unfortunately the rest of the business does like a lot of numbers. And the other one, and I think it's been mentioned by a couple of presenters already, is get good at telling stories. You know, we have hundreds, thousands of calls and customer examples that come in to us every single day, and share those with the businesses, the good ones and the bad times. That's how you're going to get traction on all the good work that you're doing, and where there's some opportunities in the business for you guys to improve. And that's it from me on this section. I'll be back to talk to you about outsourcing shortly.
Great, thanks very much, Justin. Some real insights there. The knowledge management platform, if you're a contact center that's not using one, I highly recommend you get a demonstration, because once you've seen one in action, you will see the value very, very quickly. A benchmarking report wouldn't be complete with looking at technology and technology for better staff performance. For this section of the report, we've partnered with Verent, and I'd like to introduce Ian Harrison, who's going to take us through the key findings for the technology section. Welcome, Ian.
Thank you, James. So today I'm going to talk through some of the high-level insights from the technology data that you will be able to see. And what I'm going to do is focus on 4 key areas, just spend a few minutes covering them. So the first of those areas we're going to talk about is insights, and just how valuable they are in the sense of linking to other trends like automation. Secondly, keen to just have a look at where technology existing in the contact center could perhaps be refreshed. We'll spend a bit of time having a look at channel usage and mix. And then, as always, given the current environment, have a little bit of a look at COVID and the impacts of COVID upon technology. So firstly, if we think about insights, I think we have to really talk about speech analytics. And it was mentioned just before by Justin. I think for many years, speech analytics has been a really effective tool for compliance and call driver and trend identification and quality management. And you can see in the data that about 30% of respondents are showing that they're going to invest in speech analytics. And certainly we're finding that this is a key area of interest and focus for many people at the moment. And that, coupled with 21% and 16% of people looking at chatbots and machine learning and 14% for RPA, is interesting, because all of these tools combined will be enormously impactful in understanding volume spikes, and they can also dramatically assist in employee experience as well. There are probably a number of stories that you all have around your businesses of the benefits of these technologies, both locally and globally, where you can see that chatbots have been critical in supporting volume spikes like the COVID and the bushfires. Speech analytics has been incredibly powerful for financial services and understanding call drivers in the Royal Commission and the Banking Code of Practice implications, for example. And really, it's absolutely important that you have an unstructured data analytics tool like speech and text analytics to really understand what's going on in the current environment. It's also encouraging too, because when you look at the linkages between analytics and AI and automation, those are really key to help you identify opportunities for automation and digitization, and then be able to measure the benefits of those tools once they've been implemented and how they impact your wider channels. I think it's a real opportunity to leverage analytics to make it a part of a continual improvement process as well. And this moves us towards conversational service automation and conversational AI, which is inevitably where this is all going to be evolving towards. So secondly, it's interesting that there's so many well-established contact center technologies that were rated highly for refresh and investment. So I'm talking particularly about IP telephony and call recording and workforce management systems. So those are areas that appear from the results to be the ones that would most likely be upgraded and replaced in the near future. And in the current climate, and as we move from on-prem to SaaS and cloud, there's a real opportunity to look at those solutions in a new way. And there's a move away from the traditional on-prem installations and to something that's more innovative and more nimble, such as a cloud-based solution in those spaces is critical. And probably really COVID has driven a lot of that thinking and made us realize that we need to be able to stand up new ways of supporting our staff and our customers and grow and flex up our contact center capabilities rapidly. As James mentioned, if you've got a growth from 7 to 58% of people working from home, then that's great. We've got them at home, we've got them working there, but how are we going to continue to transform the contact center technology space to support them? So there's real opportunities in the area of really core routing capabilities, core recording analytics, and particularly moving into the automated quality management space to understand what's really going on from a compliance perspective and move the volume of work that is going into call analytics and quality compliance agents, move that into more of a focus on empathic care. We heard a little bit before about knowledge management and community and gamification opportunities in the work from home space, and they're all critical, as is a new and improved workforce management capability. So if we move quickly into channel proliferation, social media was a little bit interesting for me. It's a bit of a puzzle that we have a lot of volume in social media, but not a lot of focus from respondents in wanting to improve in that space. Many people also didn't have many plans for implementing web chat or a customer service mobile app, which I think is probably worth reflecting on as well. And probably really most surprising to me is that 51% of customers or respondees really weren't that focused on automated speech recognition. And for me and for the conversations I've been having, I think there's a real opportunity here in the growth of home-enabled assistants driven by Google and Amazon, smart home speaker systems and so on, to really look at how that could drive a smarter self-service opportunity for us all. So it's probably an area that I think all of us on the call should be thinking about. And then finally, COVID and the impacts upon our businesses. Probably not surprising, we're here on a platform now talking to you. Others were responded in the survey to comments about Teams and Zoom and big growth in those platforms. And what was interesting is we've talked a lot about how those are supporting us as employees talking to each other, not necessarily about how those platforms could be used to provide services to customers, although that's increasingly a channel which is growing. So there's probably some opportunity to look at how those can be used more strategically. And then, of course, where they have been used in a significant way, one of the areas that needs to be considered is how can new channels like Teams, which are really multifaceted, be monitored and audited and have quality control from a regulatory compliance perspective applied to them as they become a service channel. So that's a very quick summary of an awful lot of data, but it was a very interesting data set, and I really enjoyed being a part of it, James. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Ian. One of the great things about a benchmarking report is it really gives you the power in your contact center if there's an area where you're not meeting the mark, and technology can often be the one where extra spend is required. So get a copy of the report, and if your technology in your contact center is not up to date, you can take it into your manager and say, look, here is an industry-wide benchmarking report, and we're falling behind the industry in these certain areas, and technology is a great one for you to be able to quantify that. Second last section for today, we're going to look at offshoring, and then we're going to conclude with salaries, because that's probably what you're all here for, to know if you're getting paid the right amount. But offshoring has been in the news a lot in 2020 as the pandemic has rolled around the world. Work has moved on and offshore. So we're going to throw back to the man at the Melbourne Aquarium, Justin Tippett, who is going to take us again through another section and show us what is happening with offshoring in contact centres around Australia.
Yeah, thank you, James. And you're right. I know I'm standing in the way of everyone finding out whether they get paid enough. So I'll try and whiz through offshoring. And obviously, not everyone has an offshore call centre, but I think we've all got a personal experience in our own lives about dealing with offshore centres. So I thought the report gave us some great insight in terms of what's happening both in our personal lives. Are we going to get stuck on an offshore call centre, and what's happening, obviously, professionally for those of us that do? There is a heap of data in the report. It's about 12 pages just on offshoring. So obviously not going to go through all of that now. So we'll just go straight to slide 76, the next slide for us now. And one of the big things we wanted to look at is offshoring going up or down. And what this report told us when we did the data was it's going down. So less work is being done offshore. It dropped down from 31% down to 25% this year of contact centres using offshore resources. And the majority of call centres that responded in this survey are only sending under 10% of their call volumes are actually going offshore. So the bulk of it is still actually being handled onshore. The stats down the bottom, you can see a big 50% down the bottom, was around what we wanted to try and understand was of the work that is being done overseas. Was it stuff that was being done here onshore first and then moved over? Or is it stuff that's just been set up immediately offshore? And so while that 50% seems like a higher number, when we actually looked into it, about 85% of the work offshore had been previously handled onshore. So what that tells us is that most centres that are sending it off are getting a bit of a sense of what the figures look like, what a normal AHT is, what a normal quality score, etc., is, getting that baseline of performance before they send it offshore. On the next slide, we wanted to look about what people were going to do. Is there going to be a change? So predicting over the next 18 months. Now, this was done pre-COVID, whether you're going to be offshoring more or less. And what we saw there was a bit of a mix. 40% said no change, 40% said more, and 20% said about less. And you sort of go, wow, that doesn't really tell us a lot, does it? But I think that's just inherent of why offshoring is such a divisive topic, because businesses use offshoring for different reasons. Some are using it for cost savings, some are using it for more operational flexibility. There's a whole bunch of different reasons, and that sort of comes through in the strategy about whether it's going to go up or down, depending on what the whole business strategy is. It's typically not a direct contact center decision, it's an organizational decision, and we'll talk about the main drivers for that. When we asked surveyed people why was the work coming back to Australia, what came out pretty clear was that it was around the customer experience. Feedback from customers was saying that they didn't like it and they've tried to bring it back on shore. The second part of it was really around, and it was sort of stuff that that Varun touched on, around this whole change of technology. And we know now that digital, everything's going digital, right? So when's the last time you ever rang your bank to ask for your bank balance? You just don't, right? You just check your app. So all those simple types of transactions were typically the ones that we sent offshore. And now they've all been automated. So that's leaving the more complex, difficult calls. And therefore what businesses are saying, geez, because they're so tough, we're going to leave those in Australia onshore instead of shipping them offshore. When we looked at the destinations of where is the offshore work going, what came through pretty clear was Philippines is the most popular, not surprisingly, for voice, and India is still actually used quite extensively, mostly for back office activity like forms processing, data entry, etc. As I touched on the previous slide, no one is offshoring more complex work. So the work that is being sent off is either deemed as the same level of complexity of what we're doing here in Australia, or slightly less. One of the other stats that came through was around segmentation, and I thought that was quite interesting. Only 25% of centres are actually segmenting the calls that they send offshore. And what I mean by that, if I use Qantas as an example, and they don't necessarily do this, but it makes sense when I explain it, they say, you know what, our platinum customers are really, really important to us. They're the ones where the bulk of the revenue comes from. We want to look after them. So we're only going to handle those calls onshore. They'll always speak to an Australian-based agent. But for our bronze, frequent flyers who don't travel with us that often, we're just going to ship those ones offshore because we're looking for a lower cost to actually handle those transactions. So yeah, only 25% of centres are actually using segmentation to determine where those calls are actually going, which was quite surprising. Looking at our next slide on training, Yep, 81. Sorry, next one. Yeah, thanks, James. What we asked people how much extra effort is involved in getting your offshore teams up and running. And about half the centres, 48%, said there was really no difference in the amount of training required for our offshore resources. But 20% said it actually required about four weeks or more of extra training when we're setting up an offshore team. And most of that was around the cultural side of things, understanding the Australian culture, slang, locations, etc. And we also found out that 54% of centres said that the speed to competency was taking either a little bit longer or much longer for an agent. So even if the training was roughly the same, to get the same level of performance was certainly taking longer in those offshore resources. In 82, on the next slide, we wanted to look at why people are offshoring. And I've always thought it was because people wanted to save money, and I was right. 61% said the primary driver for moving things offshore is purely to save costs. It's around 30 to 70% cheaper to run the same size centre offshore than it is onshore. So it's a significant cost saver. And in a current economy where a lot of businesses are doing it tough for COVID, that may either lend itself to more or less, and we'll soon find out. The other one was really operational flexibility. Having a couple of extra business sites, so if something goes down, we've got a backup site in another country or another location, and also being able to be open for longer. Because our onshore resources are quite expensive, if you've got an offshore team for the same amount of money, you could have your centre open from 24 hours or 6 a.m. to midnight, for example, whereas onshore it might be 8:30 to 5:30. So they were seeing that as a benefit for their customers, that they could have longer access hours as well. When we looked at quality, we've all got our own personal views, probably of our experience with offshore call centres, but we wanted to put some data behind it, asking contact centre people. And what that sort of revealed was about 52% of respondents said the quality from the offshore team was about the same as what our onshore teams would deliver. 32% said it was slightly lower, and encouragingly, 12% said it's actually a lot better. And having worked in offshore centres in the Philippines and New Zealand in particular, those staff are absolutely passionate about doing the best that they can. There's no question about that. I think every call centre agent tries their best. Sometimes we make it hard for them with system accesses, scripts, etc. But you can see there that the quality isn't really a bigger drop maybe as what people expected. Looking at the pandemic, did it make any difference with offshoring? Again, look, really mixed results. And again, because people use offshore very differently. About 28% said yes, more work has gone offshore. 50% of centres said it's actually moved around a little bit depending on what's going on. Obviously, if you had a Melbourne-based call centre, life's been a little bit more difficult for you than perhaps in the other states. But we also know in the Philippines, in particular, they've had a lot of issues with COVID and agents not being able to get to their workplaces, etc. And that's had a huge impact. I think it's worth noting in this report that the people that we surveyed all have Australian-based call centres. So if you had a centre that had 100% of their offshore call centre done in the Philippines, for example, they wouldn't have been included in this report. And I think they were probably the ones that were the biggest impacted because they've had to quickly scramble to try and build some onshore capability very, very quickly. Final point, what the future is going to look like. I really do think it's just going to be a lot more simple work. The digitisation is leaving all the complex stuff behind. And I think because we want to do such a great job for our customers these days, if they're more complex calls, I think it's more likely that that stuff's going to be handled onshore. I think there's going to be better segmentation, and technology will help us. And as I touched on a bit earlier in the CX section, we know now that trying to do the right thing for our customers is better for the business. It's not just a nice thing to do. It leads to higher profit, higher retention, etc. in the whole business. So I think offshoring will certainly play its role in that. That's it for me. Thanks for the opportunity.
Great, thanks very much, Justin. It's always interesting. Every contact centre that has the option of considering outsourcing is always wondering, what's the market trend, what's happening overseas, what are the most popular locations, what's the cost benefit analysis, what's the cost to customer experience, all those types of things. So grab a copy of our report, which we'll be sending to everyone in the mail. You'll all be receiving a hard copy, and you can have a look through that section. The final section for today is salaries. In this year's benchmarking report, one thing in particular that we've looked at that we'll quickly go through today is obviously base salaries, but we've tried to get a greater understanding of bonus structures and what the top performers are actually earning with regard to bonuses. The first thing that I would like to start off with, though, is actually the pandemic response. Because what's always really interesting in a time of economic instability is how is it going to impact salaries? And for most of our contact centers, 90+% of our workforce is actually made up of our agents. So how has the pandemic impacted salaries? Well, for 89% of agents, the salary has remained unchanged. And for 3%, they've actually had a salary increase. Now, as a recruitment agency, while we specialize in contact center recruitment, we do work in other industries. And I think we should be extremely proud that the fact that the contact center industry has had 92% of salaries either remain unchanged or increased. Most other industries have been hit a lot harder in terms of salary reductions. So we should be proud of this fact. We should really be promoting that the contact center industry is a really, really stable employer and that we look after our employees and that their salaries have remained unchanged. What will be interesting over the next 12 months, though, are salary increases. And at the time of reporting, around about half the respondents said that yes, a normal or an annual salary increase was still likely to occur. Now, we can probably all understand in our own minds if that doesn't occur. And so when a salary increase doesn't occur that is expected, it definitely has a flow-on effect to employees, to the way they feel about their work. And so there'll be a lot of sensitivities around, I guess, the delay of salary increases where it's going to occur, with at least 1/3 of contact centers already saying that no, we won't be, we are very unlikely to have a salary increase over the next 12 months. Looking at some of the actual data, and so what we've got here is we've broken down frontline agent salaries into many different sections because there's many different roles. So we've asked a couple of things here. We wanted to find out the base salary for every role. We're only showing some of the roles on this page here. There's 2 or 3 pages on agent level. We've then asked about what percentage pay an individual bonus, what percentage pay a combined team and bonus. We then wanted to know what does an average performer get as a bonus and what does a top performer get as a bonus. So we want to differentiate those two. A lot of contact centers think their bonus structure is really, really good. From a recruiter's perspective though, when we say, okay, what is it? We then hear the answer, and a lot of the time, you know, it's not quite as good as the contact center thinks it is. But what we've got here in this report is we can provide you examples of the average base salary, the average bonus, but also what the top performers are earning. So for example, if we look at outbound sales, third from the bottom there, 53,500 is the average base, but the top performers are averaging pretty much an extra 20,000 in bonuses. So if your top performer in your outbound sales role is not getting at least 20,000 in bonuses on top of their base salary, then you're not meeting the market standard. We've then done the same for team leader roles. So we've then looked at what is the average base salary for customer service, sales, help desk, and market research team leaders. And again, we've asked what is an average performer getting as a bonus, and then what is the top performer getting as a bonus. Like most roles, the biggest difference is in sales, but there was also a noticeable difference here in terms of help desk. And we then went on to do this for specialized and senior roles. So contact center trainers, training managers, workforce planners and workforce planning managers, which have been probably the most sought after roles now for the last 12 months, operation managers, contact centers, and head of contact centers. So for some of these salaries, we see very narrow bandings. So for example, contact center managers, 90% of contact center managers that responded to this report were getting a base salary between 120 and 140. So that's what we call a really narrow band. So if you're a contact center manager and your salary falls outside of that band, you're in the 10%. Whereas with head of contact center, we saw a much broader range though. So we saw a $100,000 range between 150,000 and 250,000. So the scope there is much larger. If you've got workforce planning skills, you're in hot demand, and we've seen the average base salary go up by around a quarter over the last 12 months because these skills have come so in demand. Before we move on to questions and answers, there's just a couple of things I'd like to share with you. At Smart, we're really proud of the fact that we run a contact center mentoring program. Quite a few people on the call today and quite a few of our presenters are involved in the mentoring program. And this is where we pair the next generation of industry leaders, who are normally team leaders. We give them a mentor from another contact center. We give them a contact center manager or a senior person from another contact center, and they pair together in a mentoring relationship for 10 months. This year we ran the program across Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, and Adelaide. We had close to 120 participants in the program. So if you are interested in being involved as a mentor, a mentee, or would like to learn more, head to our website, smart.com.au/mentoring, and check out the program. It's fully funded by Smart Recruitment, and we would love to have you involved. A lot of you have asked us before, why do we put this report together at Smart Recruitment? We're a recruiter to the industry, and our view is that the better we know the industry, the better we can recruit for your business. We're really proud of this report. We're really happy that we can provide you with some real insights into the industry, and we use these insights to be the best recruitment agency that we can be. So if you're not currently using us to assist with your recruitment process, or you're just interested in finding out more, we would love to hear from you to discuss our recruitment process. So that's the end of the formal presentation today. If you've got a question, please feel free to type it into the box now or unmute yourself. I have muted everybody, but if you've got a question you'd like to put to any of our presenters on any of the categories, please unmute yourself now and ask, and I will just pause for a moment to see if any questions come through. With over 120 people on the line, it's often hard to get a question. But
Hi,
I think
James. It's Julia from Bendigo and Adelaide Bank in Adelaide. I just have a question. Hi there. I'm just really interested around the staff engagement piece, and particularly where we were talking about sort of, the bonuses and how to engage staff and, retention and all of that stuff. In financial services, we're not able to recognise and reward staff in the same financial way. Are there any other thoughts on, are there any other thoughts on how you can do it without kind of necessarily providing the financial reward?
Yeah, it's a really good point, Julia. And actually, one of the questions we asked, I don't know if I can find it as we're talking on the team leaders section, was, due to the findings of the Royal Commission, here's the question now. Did you alter the bonus or the commission structure for team leaders? So only 12% said yes, but I'm not sure at Bendigo Adelaide Bank whether you already had one in place or not, but it is something that has changed for a lot of contact centres. Look, employee engagement, there are a lot of different things, and one thing we know with employees is that everybody values different types of engagement in different ways. This slide here that Matthew talked through, around employee engagement initiatives that you've introduced recently that have had the most impact, I'd really encourage you to have a look at that. And a lot of hygiene things that Matt talked about, like fruit bowls and ping pong table and free drinks Friday. Staff are wanting more than that now. They're wanting meaningful work. Career path is probably one of the biggest ones we get as a recruitment agency for why people are leaving their roles. So have a look through this section here. There's many pages that talk about things other contact centers are doing, and hopefully you can grab some value from that particular section. Thanks for that question, Julia.
Thank you. Thanks.
Anyone else with a question before we end the session today? Lots of people.
Hello there, James.
Hello.
Hi, this is Deepak here from Customer Services Audit. James, I may have missed this, but was there any question in relation to what is the or do organizations, contact centers particularly, look to achieving any kind of benchmark or any kind of global standard?
So sorry, Deepak, is your question around our contact centers trying to achieve global standards? Is that right?
That's right. Say, for instance, the ISO 18295, which is the customer service global standard. Did you have a question in there, or was it maybe Sean talking about customer service centers aligning themselves to the company's strategy and vision?
Yeah, I'll jump in first and then let Sean chat. Look, it's a really good point, Deepak. No, we didn't ask that question. One thing, we will continue to do more research into the industry. So I will note that down, and in some follow-ups from today, if any of you have got other parts of contact centers you'd like surveyed, please let us know. I'll throw to you, Sean, to help answer that question around aligning the values of a contact center with the broader organization.
I'll try and answer it really quickly given the time, because I could talk about it for a very long time, but I think people looking for intrinsic motivation and meaning in their roles, and that is a more powerful motivator. And it goes to the question that was raised before as well around ways to motivate staff. If you can work with your teams to come up with a common set of values that they can all relate to, that ties into the organization's vision or purpose, then you will get more creativity and productivity from them than you would from just having KPIs alone. Now, that's not to say get rid of KPIs. It's important to measure things, but if you're looking for ways to truly motivate and get the most out of your staff, then you need to try and tap into those intrinsic motivators. So yeah, I would say, yeah, working with your team to come up with values or a DNA, something that represents them, that relates back to that purpose, and then telling stories. Just keep telling stories all the time about how they've brought that to life. That would be my recommendation.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you very much, Deepak, for your question there. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we'll stop the session there. We've just hit 11:30. Thank you to everybody who has been involved in today. As mentioned, we'll be posting you out a copy. You'll get a hard copy of the report in the mail, hopefully over the next 5 to 10 business days. Thank you to all of our partners who who joined today. Sean from the Agile Contact Center, Alex from COPC, Justin from CX Central, Tom from AP Psychology, and Ian from Varent, as well as my colleagues and friends at Smart Recruitment who have put much. Thanks very much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll be in touch soon.